we're going to be talking about the art of building muscle, right? Oftentimes people come to you and they want to get toned and or lose body fat, right? But in order to get toned, you're going to have to go through a phase of building muscle. So Jason is going to talk to us a little bit about some of the fundamentals of mastering building phases. So Jason, talk to us a little bit about when you have a client coming to you and they're, what the goal is, Jason, I'm just trying to get toned. What would you do when it comes to setting the starting program? And we'll talk more for like a Gen Pop client. And then if there's similarities with athletes, to start a building phase for that? Or when do they need to go into a fat loss phase or a building phase?
Yeah. So I think as a coach, when your clients are initially coming in and inquiring with you guys for your services, I think you've got two ways of looking at it, right? You've got your client that's going to tell you what they want to do. And then as a coach, you have an obligation to direct your client in the direction that is going to get them the best results long-term, right? So my thing is, if you have a client that comes to you and let's say they're relatively obese and say that they want to build muscle, we know that that's probably not the best, situation for them to really be pushing surpluses and keep growing and so forth. That's going to create a lot of, unhealthy components of their, phases and so forth. So initially, for me as a coach, it's like you need to be educating your client in why you're choosing these certain pathways for them to go down. If your clients have a better understanding around why you want them to take a certain pathway, then it's easier for them to trust in the process, be compliant, and execute the things that you need them to execute, right? So I do this with a lot of my clients. If I look at, we'll talk about Gen Pop, but I use this a lot in the bikini competing elements, where if I have an athlete where a female isn't in great shape from a body composition standpoint, and I'm about to push her into a big build phase, especially being a female, I'll always look at trying to optimize an initial maybe fat loss phase if it's going to be advantageous for her at that time. Now, I obviously have a certain number of, requirements in terms of we do body caliper testing here. We get clients to do DEXA scans. Obviously, you've got so many different metrics that you can use to assess your client's initial data. For me, if my clients are over a certain body fat percentage or they're over a certain body fat in terms of kilos, then I will generally prioritize a fat loss phase at that initial phase if that's what they need, right? Now, the reason why I may do that initially is because it gives me a lot more room on the runway to be able to enter into this building phase. Now, we know that in order for us to optimize a hypertrophy building phase, we want to extend that phase out as long as possible. So if I said to someone, look, we can only really build you for 8 weeks, but once we get to 8 weeks, what we've calculated in the amount of body fat or weight that you're going to accumulate, you're probably going to have to stop that process and drop into a mini cut or dieting phase. Then that's not really going to be favorable to our long-term progression. So when I'm looking at an initial client I might go, let's initiate a first phase, fat loss phase, where we might do like an 8-week kind of cutting phase to kind of strip off some excess body fat that they may not necessarily need. And then what that might allow me to do is then get 16 or 20 weeks of building without any disruptions from that aspect. Does that make sense? So those are the things that I'm looking at with my clients initially. For Gen Pop, especially in hypertrophy phases, the first initial couple of phases, like initial 12 weeks with clients as a Gen Pop, they're not really going to build a ton of muscle anyway. So we know that their initial phases, let's say their first 2 or 3 training phases, a lot of that is just going to be about skill acquisition. So it's how are they moving these weights? Having a really good understanding around execution, tempo, intensity, loading. So they're not really maximizing their ability to grow lean tissue through this time anyway. We obviously do have the concept of newbie gains when someone enters into a training realm that if they haven't trained previously before, that they have the ability to accumulate, faster initial gains than someone that is well trained. And although that in some cases may be true, in my experience, the most clients generally will obtain those once they've gone through that initial phase. In the first phases, they're also accumulating work capacity, so their ability to execute good amount of volume, good amount of load, as well. And I think that these are the components that are going to make the most amount of changes in those first initial phases anyway. So for me, when we're structuring our clients' phases for Gen Pop, the first initial phases have to be structured in a way that are accounting for those initial progressions and what we're looking for. Yeah. So if I look at getting a client first up and I'm like, look, you're going to pack on, 10 kilos of lean tissue, we know that that's just not possible, right? So for me, with a general pop client in the initial phase, is I'm going to look at, okay, well, what are we going to quantify progression in our first 12 weeks, let's say? And a large part of that quantifiable, data is going to be how much load or how much stronger have they gotten through that time? How is their work capacity? How much volume can they now elicit in their sessions? How well do they recover through their sessions? Once we've achieved that initial block, our programming can become a little bit more geared towards specific hypertrophy training, which is where we might look at that in like phase 2 of what we do with the programming.